Hey there, you're listening to Resilience Radio. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show and owner of Resilience Occupational Therapy. I'm on here today with Robert, and how do you pronounce your last name? I want to make sure I get that right.
Steffke. Steffke.
Like all episodes, and for those of you who are on video, you can see him here. In any case, these episodes are not meant to be diagnostically prescriptive or medical advice. Everyone's got their own healthcare needs, and you should seek your own doctor and healthcare practitioners for that. None of this is meant to be expressed as my opinion or the opinion of Resilience Occupational Therapy or Resilience Radio. So take that all with a grain of salt. It's great to have you on today. I'll have you
Step more into, I'll just say, a fuller way of being. And I think the field of psychotherapy can, in some ways, it can limit it, and in some ways, it can really open it up. And so I love getting to work with new therapists. And I also work as a psychedelic guide at this point. Ketamine-assisted therapy is the legal psychedelic that can be used above board for psychotherapists. And so that is the one that I use. But I'm really interested in non-ordinary states of consciousness and how that helps kind of the overall shift from somebody from limitation to a greater sense of who they are.
find your way to the ketamine in use of your therapy.
Yeah, it's a great question. I personally had some experience with working with a guide and getting supported and working through some of my history, and began working with non-ordinary states of consciousness, not just ketamine-assisted therapy, but there's, even outside of psychedelics, there's a lot of, there's ability to access areas of the subconscious and areas that would be held beneath our normal knowing. And so I started working with a lot of different practitioners who would help me to access places and take me on what I would consider mini journeys. And I've come out of those with a lot of healing and a greater understanding of who I was and what my purpose was and where I was going. And so I just became interested in how to help others to enter into those states.
Legal standpoint, is ketamine the only mind-affecting substance that can legally be used in this way?
Yeah, that's correct. In the state of Vermont, there's other states that have opened up the decriminalized other psychedelics, and there's some efforts to get other psychedelics FDA approved. That's a lot of that's still underway.
With you, is that something that can be covered by insurance?
Not that I'm aware of actually. I'm not sure in the state of Vermont. I've been practicing in California for the last 15 years, and in California, the insurance companies were not covering it. But I'm not aware whether that's a possibility in the state of Vermont or not.
When you do in your practice, it is a direct pay approach.
Yeah, it is.
So I know a little bit about some of these benefits that people claim for psychoactive medications or drugs. Is this different than just, and I'm sort of being a little bit more flippant here, how is this just not recreational use? Well, how is this actually therapeutic?
That's a great question. There's a lot to be said about this idea of set and setting. So a mindset that somebody comes in with, and then the setting. So, there's the intentionality of walking in to say, I'm here to do a particular body of work or to heal a particular area. That in and of itself can change a lot about the experience. And I think working with a practitioner who's oriented in that way is really different. The psychedelic itself, I'm not of the mindset of we just take the pill and that's the fix, but it's really relational. And a lot of the work is done in the relational field. And as more information gets accessed or new information gets accessed for someone, how am I helping them to relate to that in a way that supports the internal shifts that they're looking for?
What are the benefits? What circumstances might someone be indicated for, in a therapeutic environment?
Yeah, I think it's been studied intensively for depression and shown a lot of efficacy for people working through depression. And a lot of those studies are based on IV administered ketamine and usually in clinics where a doctor might administer the ketamine in an IV and the patient is just alone in a room and having the experience on their own. The way that I work primarily is in helping people to recover and work with trauma. And trauma is a big and often used word. And when we use a word so much, it starts to lose its meaning. But yeah, just as a placeholder, to help people work and recover from trauma, and somebody's coming in with a particular circumstance that they're wanting to heal from and work with, I might suggest ketamine as a way to help to go deeper than what we've been able to do in traditional therapy.
Ketamine actually doing? for the
Yeah,
brain,
great
and,
question.
and how does that
I
help?
yeah, I'm not a neuroscientist. What I know through
Fair
my
enough.
experience, yeah, and what I witnessed is that it helps someone to drop out of the ordinary state of relating. So I might just soften a little bit in what's called the default mode network of the brain. So where the personality is held, or my normal way of relating with somebody, that it helps to soften that a bit. So in that state, new things can emerge that might not be known otherwise. Stuff can come to the surface, and then we can start to work with it in a relational way. I've seen that what it can really help people do is discover their ability to just be an observer, to get into that kind of observer mindset. So they might be having an experience, they might be going through and experiencing a certain trauma that they've had in their life, and but there's enough of a distance from it, and the neurochemistry that's happening when on ketamine provides that a little bit of safety, maybe, and that distance to be able to witness what's happening as an observer. And in that state, I think so much of the healing of trauma is about how we re-experience an experience that someone's had in life, how we go back and meet it with a new level of consciousness. So helping people to develop that observer mindset, I think, really helps. And I think it can also really help to, as we learn to do that more, to develop the capacity to, okay, I can meet these really difficult areas in my life. I can meet even difficult area for someone might be joy, or experience of happiness. Well, people might go into these extreme, maybe not extreme, but just these higher states of happiness and joy, and and get to broaden their bandwidth for experience.
Some people might be, so this is a psychoactive compound of some sort, and it is, how does it differ from the acid trip, so to speak? It sounds like this is much more subtle, or maybe I'm reading into that.
No, it's a great question. The nice thing about ketamine for therapeutic purposes is it's relatively short-lived. So an experience will be 2 to 3 hours, and it's a really good intro for people to come in and have an experience that we know whatever we're going into, it's only going to it's only going to last for a period of time, and it's a really good way to get to know somebody and how they might operate in non-ordinary states of consciousness. Each psychedelic has subtle different qualities to it, and ketamine it's a dissociative. So meaning a lot of the journey work in ketamine is really internal. So it's almost like being in almost a dreamlike state, but it also can be really somatic and physical. People might have huge emotional releases. They might have physical releases, body shaking and moving stuck energy through the body. So yeah, each psychedelic will have slightly different properties. Ketamine is the one that I understand and have worked.
The risk of addiction for something like ketamine.
Yes. So ketamine is known as one of the kind of the barriers for people coming in, is that, there's ketamine is known as how, a lot of people might know somebody who's had a really difficult experience with ketamine, and it's caused hardship in their life through addiction. I have worked with people who have come in with ketamine addiction, and they've experienced it in this setting as a whole different experience than using it recreationally and using it to escape. So I think there's a quality of addiction that is really oriented to how I leave my experience. And if somebody's going to be working therapeutically with ketamine, the general mindset is, let's inhabit this experience more deeply and move towards it. So I've heard of some people actually using therapeutically administered ketamine to help people work with addiction around ketamine, but it is something that's definitely needs to be screened, and watching people for addictive tendencies and making sure that's, there's also a limitation to the access of it when it's being approached therapeutically as well. But it is known as a street drug. It does have that reputation to it. So, but in the setting of psychotherapy, I think a lot of people experience it as a different experience.
It was my understanding that while demonized as sort of a recreational drug, some of the psychedelics actually would help people with addiction because of the rewiring that it can do to the brain, at least in the temporary, to help people break free of those cycles. Sort of the use of it in the 60s was maybe less addictive, and maybe actually sort of self-treatment once someone got to acid might have been sort of the refresh that helped them not be using the other drugs quite as much.
That's typical with a lot of psychedelics. I think ketamine has a little bit more of an addictive quality to it, but like you said, the neural restructuring that can happen underneath it and the neuroplasticity that emerges for days after a ketamine session, yeah, there's a rewiring that can happen to actually to help kind of counteract any addiction that people have had in the past.
The sort of acute you get is within a couple of hours in the container of the treatment with you. The rewiring can be going on for days afterwards.
That's correct.
The window that's been opened up. The way that I've heard it described is that we have these in neurodevelopment, we have these windows in which our brain learns new things. Under the age of 7, we're particularly susceptible to learning languages. During adolescence, we're particularly susceptible to what our peers think and sort of where we fit within a social construct and our interactions with other people. I realizing that it gives me a little bit, encourages me to give adolescents a little bit more of a break, that it matters much more deeply to them what their peers think of them than it does to adults, because that's where their brain is at. But it was my understanding that taking a drug like ketamine actually reopens some of those windows that we think of as only during the under 7 for language, or only for certain periods of time for neural development, for neuromuscular development, or relationship and development, and that by up one of these windows, you then have the opportunity to the right way to do that. And some of the things that fascinates me as a body worker is there's some evidence that seems to support that it's had a stroke and they've gone through some of their PT or OT rehab, that there may be continued neural growth that can take place for them with the use of a drug like ketamine. And I'm curious if any of the things I just said there, if that's that you want to riff on or correct or elaborate on.
Yeah, this is, again, not my area of expertise in terms of the brain science around it, but experientially, what I've known personally and I've seen people experience, I think a lot of the impacts can actually come in the days to weeks to months afterwards. You know, the studies are showing, you know, within there's a window of time, days to a week of neuroplasticity and or heightened neuroplasticity. But you know, any kind of, you know, if we're going to have a big experience, the real we'll call it work is in the afterwards, to how do I implement this and integrate it into my life, and what are the practices that I have that are reminding me of what happened there, and how do I bring this into my everyday life. So I really am a proponent of the work that happens before and after, and not just the journey as being a standalone experience, but really how are we taking, okay, that information came or that experience happened, and how can we now start to wire that into our nervous system and develop new capacities based on some of those experiences. And yeah, that neuroplastic window is a really nice time to do it. So often we'll do an integration session with somebody a day to a couple days afterwards, where we're working, you know, they're still in that window, and we can help integrate a lot of what the experience was, and even not just integrate it, but take it that next step forward. Okay, so yeah, okay, so we were here, now where are we going with this, and what new developments can occur.
Said you've worked on this to help people with trauma, helping them to release some of their old patterns. It's got some clinical use for depression. What do you find you're using it for mostly? Who might be a good candidate for this?
It's a great question. I mean, typically, I've worked with a lot of, like, I think anyone who's coming in with this kind of a stuck pattern, and you know, I know I do this, and I'm either stuck in this period of grief, or I'm stuck in this behavior, or I'm not able to move this understanding of my relationship forward. So it might open some new possibility in how we can see and work with this patterning that's gotten really ingrained in somebody. So I'd say, you know, really, it's when I've been working with somebody for a while and I say, okay, like, I can see a possibility that we could go a little bit deeper into this. And there's something in the way our normal interactions are happening that aren't allowing us to access what is the root cause here. And that's what I'm always looking for. So somebody might be working with some kind of patterning they have. The real interest is there's a root. There was some experience that happened in life, or multiple experiences that happened in life. And it doesn't necessarily need to be personal. It can be transgenerational. And there's a lot of really good research about what's held and stored in our genetics from our ancestors. And so some memories aren't even our own sometimes. So somebody might be in a pattern and then be able to Yeah, to get a little bit deeper of an understanding. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go back and revisit the moment where something happened, but it's held in the body and it's held in the psyche. And, and we can have just a felt sense of something. And that felt sense sometimes, oh, I got this, wow, there's a pain in my shoulder. And there's just like this intensity around my shoulder. And just the experience of that corrective, like I'm in a ketamine journey with someone and they say, can you just hold my shoulder? I'm just sitting there and I'm holding space for that and pressure. And they're re-experiencing whatever that pain is. They might have memories, they might not have memories, but they're having this somatic experience of it. And then this unwinding can begin to happen. Not a direct answer, I think, but
So what is it? So I started to get a little bit of a sense of what a session could look like, right? So you're someone's, I assume there's plenty of intake and such to make sure this is the right fit for someone. And then you've got a couple of hours of this intense treatment. And during that time, you're holding space, you might literally be putting your hands on someone's shoulders, or are you asking a lot of questions or doing much sort of cognitive behavioral processing or anything? What type of tools are you as a therapist using the trip itself?
yeah. So um, it varies dramatically, a lot from person to person. I think a lot of therapists might use it in the somebody will be laying down with eye shades on and having music, and then the music becomes part of the whole journey and the experience, and kind of can really help to guide in and of itself. I really like to work more, and I'm doing this more and more all the time in a relational way. So I'm a body worker as well, training cranial sacral and some just intuitive touch with people. And yeah, I just really appreciate these moments where there's a possibility for some touch to happen or some support to happen. And so much for me of the healing, I think if we're looking at trauma, or what we're calling trauma is just a stuck experience or a stuck energy or a stuck memory it's really held in the body often. So much of that is just this real like experience of having to go through something alone. I went through an intensity and I was by myself in it and I didn't have support in it. And I think humans are really capable of experiencing hardship in a community setting. When there's real holding and real support, then it doesn't need to get stuck. But what happens when we're going through an experience and we feel tremendously alone, there's not that ability to integrate it in real time. And so we disassociate from our body. We have to leave the experience. And so the brain and the body remembers it as an experience to say, okay, this is something that if I smell, taste, touch anything like it, I'm going to stay away from it. And that's where the stuck patterns can happen. And so for me, a lot of the healing is in that relational work. So somebody's having this experience and I'm letting them know I am here. And whether that's just simply a hand on a body or holding of a hand sometimes, or my voice. Somebody might go into really dark space. And if I just hum to them, and let them know there's a person here, they're not alone in that experience. I might just a lot of subtle ways of working. There's not a lot of talk or processing that's happening during the journey time. It is a very inward experience, but that experience, just not having to go through something alone, I think can be really healing in and of itself.
Such social mammals that at a seminar the other day, and there was discussion of the fear of public speaking, that so many people, the anecdote is that people would prefer to be in the coffin than to be giving the eulogy, is the classic statement that's such a innate fear for many people. I don't have it as much, but there's definitely been times where I've been anxious with public speaking. And that was described as the fear of being ostracized from your group, that being ostracized from the tribe is as good or worse than death. Like, you're no longer part of that group. So processing, we have a tendency, I think, in a lot of our ideas of therapy, and people come into my clinic and work with me one-on-one as well, but is that idea that you go through personal growth. But the relational component I find quite interesting. And that's why the therapist matters. And the relationship with the therapist matters, as well as just being present and the way you're describing, versus them processing that alone. Also reminds me of, there's a classic rat study, which is kind of on its first face was kind of doom and gloom as far as addictive behavior, where I think it was cocaine that the rats were being given. Cocaine water, and there's like sugar water, and that the rats, when left in this cage to decide what they want to do, became addicted to the cocaine water at the expense of getting the nutrients from the sugar water. They became very addicted. Decided to redo the study, where if you put the rat in cages with other rats and other things to do, and you're not just in solitary confinement, being bored, then those rats seemed to avoid the cocaine water and actually took the stuff that sustained them. So how much addictive behavior and problematic patterns we have to do with what we have access to in our environment and who we have access to in our environment. And to me, that's heartening. And that just shows, again, that we're relational creatures.
Yeah. Yeah. It's making me think of a man that I know of who does work, did more in the past work with addicts, like street addicts, people who were unhoused and living on the street and in heavy addiction up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And one of the statements I heard him make was that the First Nations people of Canada, they didn't have a word for addiction prior to the Industrial Revolution. And that the link there is that, during the Industrial Revolution, we took people out of community and we put them into nuclear families. And, a child in a nuclear family just inherently will not get everything that they need. And that's through no fault of the parents. You and I are both parents. And we know as hard as we might try that our kids, there's so much need from a child. And when the parents aren't supported or the kids aren't supported, like in a traditional culture, where I heard a woman describe, she grew up in a traditional culture in Africa, and she described being able to go to 8 different houses and get fed at the end of the day, or have 8 nursing mothers to be able to breastfeed from. And just that nurturance when you're going through an experience, to be able to say, I've got a whole community that's going to hold me in this and to take care of me. I'm also thinking of a study that was done of North Vietnamese, and there was a question why the North Vietnamese didn't develop PTSD in the same way that the South Vietnamese did in the Vietnam War, and especially the American soldiers did. And one of the findings that they discovered was that the North Vietnamese, they were going back home to their village, and they were going back to their people. They were getting chances to tell their stories. They were being held. They could emote. They were seen as warriors, and there were ritual baths that people would go through. So they would have this really hard experience, and they would come back to community, and the community would hold them and support them in that. And in those cases, the instance of PTSD just wasn't as high. And and you juxtapose that to an American soldier who was fighting in a war and there was no purpose there, or less purpose, and in fact came home to a culture that wasn't able to hold what they had experienced, didn't have any understanding for what they had experienced, and in a lot of ways might have demonized them for what they had. And the instance that, this now more is where PTSD really became known. So when you're in an experience without purpose and without community, it gets lodged in the body in a different way. We can't stay with that experience. But there's something so powerful when I'm sitting with someone and they're in the midst of terror or despair, and I'm just holding their hand. And just that experience of, I've got you, you are not alone, keep going. And then the body knows so naturally how to work it out. It's really amazing to watch the body and the psyche go into exactly what needs to happen to heal when held. And yeah, it's really an honor to get to sit in those spaces with people. So I think that's really one of the benefits of non-ordinary states of consciousness, if held well by somebody who is, I don't want to just promote psychedelics or non-ordinary states as a whole. I want to say that the practitioner really matters, and the ability of the practitioner to really hold space for whatever might arise. And I think a lot of that when I'm working with new therapists is just about let's continue to meet our own edges, the places where we might limit the experience of another human being when they're with us unconsciously, and where we can expand our capacity to hold whatever arises for somebody. So somebody might bring something up, and what you're talking about earlier just makes me think of, like, there's so much shame in our experiences. We've had this experience and we have been ostracized. We've we had a difficult experience and someone told us not to cry, as simple as that. Or we skinned our knee and someone told us to suck it up, And so our emotional states, or our normal body's reaction was limited, and we developed shame around it. So when somebody has to re-inhabit that kind of an experience, what's going to arise in that as well is shame, and that experience of shame. And that's one of the scariest places, I think, for people to go in the presence of another human being. So if the practitioner has worked with their own shame enough to know what those edges feel like and can hold that space for somebody, I think that can be a really healing experience.
It seems like we have this dichotomy where there's something limiting about the culture of our nuclear family and our the siloing of our feelings, or expecting to get all of our support from one person. Don't have the sense of raising children in community and such. How does then a therapy that is one-on-one? I know there's the ketamine to open things up, and there's the support, and there's the training. So I'm not at all trying to say that this isn't helpful. There's something that seems a little bit backwards and about fixing the problem of people having limited relationship with a confined limited relationship. But I can also see,
Yes.
like, just giving a bunch of ketamine to people and going out to a rave or whatever is not necessarily going to have a therapeutic benefit to really resolve trauma. But how do you parse the fact that you're in a clinic one-on-one with someone when what they need is a broader community?
Agreed. And I think it's a direction that I really want to keep heading. I think it's a move in the right direction to at least have one person who's going to sit there with you, even a parent who's able to, sit with a child that's going through distress and has the capacity to hold that with the child. That's an incredibly powerful and healing experience. So one-on-one is powerful. But I just had an experience actually fairly recently where I went into a non-ordinary state of consciousness and I experienced utter terror, utter existential terror and aloneness. And I had this experience of coming out of it and opening my eyes to see six people sitting there and waiting expectantly for me. Their eyes, just there was no need from them. There was just, where have you been? And we're ready to hear about it whenever you're ready to tell us. And just that experience was it just rewired something in me and it really made me want to find ways. I think one of the things in our culture and capitalism, there's a difficulty in how do we pay? how do we create experiences? How do we create circumstances where there can be six people for one person? And so my mind is always kind of working in those directions. How do we open up more community-based experiences where we can just do that for each other? There's a man who wrote a book on grief, and he talked about kind of this first grief that we have of as children. We expect when we wake up to have 12 pairs of eyes staring back at us, and wondering where we went in our dream time. And that's just kind of wired into our nervous system from growing up in community. And without that, there's a grief and a loss. So yeah, I think we're reimagining possibilities and how we create that. Yeah, in a state where we start where we're at, and we show up in the best way we can with what's available to us right now, while continuing to open up to where else can we go.
The perfect be the enemy of the good,
Yeah.
because you're moving in a good direction with trying to give people the supports they need. So when someone has an experience with ketamine with you, are they often, if they've got a specific trauma or condition that they're working through, is that often what comes up for them? Or how often is it like, hey, I thought I was coming in because I was mad at this person and couldn't let go of this anger, but really there's this childhood trauma that I completely blocked, and that comes up? Or some existential dread? Or how often is it different than as expected?
Yeah, I'd say very often. I'd say, what I really prepare people for is a couple of things. One is this is going to go in whatever direction it goes in, and we are not in charge of that necessarily. And there's a certain kind of surrender that's involved in that. But there's also a trust for me in that there is a mechanism that knows what healing is, and it knows there's some steps to go to get there. So I might really help somebody to understand that. Like, if what I'm looking for is my life feels totally purposeless right now, and I want to go into this session and I want to get purpose out of this session, I might say, well, we might spend some time in everything that blocks the understanding of what your purpose is, and we don't even know what that is. So we might end up in a totally different direction than we might expect. The other thing that I really need to prepare people for is, there's so much kind of a rah, okay, we've got this new tool, we're going to use it and everybody's going to heal, and just helping people to keep expectations at a level that are appropriate. So, I think healing and growth just happen at the pace that they do. And we have to be ready for whatever that is and whatever that might take. And that, one session or a number of sessions or even some years sometimes, we end up in a different place than we expect. But I always hope that it's a better place, whatever that means. Yeah. So it can go wherever it's going to go. And I like to be open to kind of just the unknown in that and the mystery of that and make space for that. It's not near path.
Treatments does someone typically get with you?
It varies a lot. If I'm going to work with somebody, I want to have a long-standing relationship, especially before we're going to go into any type of a non-ordinary experience. I want to know how somebody meets distress. I want to know kind of the makeup of who they are and the supports that they have in their life outside of this work, where they're going to go if things get difficult. Because sometimes people will go into a state and things are going to get a little harder before they get better. So yeah, I love to work with people for years, but I will also work with people for sometimes one session can be a really powerful session for somebody when paired with some prep and some integration time as well.
Listening to this is like, yes, I've been wanting to do ketamine for a while. This guy sounds great. I have my other therapists and I do other work. Can I just see you for the ketamine? How many sessions do I have to do with you before you'll clear me, kind of thing? What's that look like?
Yeah, I think it's really case by case. I mean, that to me happens in a first, like, let's have one session and let's just sit down and get a feeling together. Be too predictive with somebody before I know them. I know what their relationship looks like with their therapist, and I also know if I can have a relationship with their therapist as well, and open up conversations and understand kind of what they've been doing up until this point. So those are really case by case for me. But I do like this series of let's do 1 to 3 sessions together, knowing that you feel like you've got really good support in other areas, and let's maintain that support outside of this work that we're doing.
Is any of your work covered by insurance, or is it all?
Unfortunately, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm covered by insurance in California, but I'm new. So yeah, that's not happening here.
Okay. And what do things cost?
That's a great question. Yeah. So my typical hourly rate is $185, and so a ketamine session will be anywhere from $500 to $700 depending. But I like to work with people where they're at and help support somebody in what they need. And sometimes working with somebody is such a I meet somebody and say, God, this is just, I really want to support this work and really want to work together. There's something vibrant that feels really alive here. And yeah, so I've done pro bono sessions with people as well, depending on the circumstances. But I also have to manage my time and take care of my family as well. So it's a balance, as I'm sure you well know. And yeah,
but point out that it is June 2026. That if someone's listening to this even a month or two from now, that your rates may have completely changed, and not to quote you on this as you said on Irvin's show. Is there anything else you want to say about your work or about ketamine? Wrap up?
Yeah, I think what's most interesting, or one of the interesting things for me, is just how the introduction of psychedelics into normal psychotherapy is just changing the conversation about what healing looks like, and that we're not just going to look to like this tool is like a Shangri-La and this is it, but it really starts to broaden the conversation of what is it we're even doing here, and where does change occur, on what level of consciousness do we affect change, and how can we open that up in any kind of a setting, with psychedelics or outside of psychedelics. I love what it's adding, and I also feel like when anything gets when a new treatment comes on board, it can get a little hyped, and so I just want to be cautious about how psychedelics are for a period. I think things have slowed a little bit, but the conversation got really okay, this is the new thing, and we're going to heal trauma, and everyone's going to heal, and how it can kind of move in all those directions. And so I just like to keep a steadiness in the conversation as much as possible.
Good. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Irvin. Good to talk with you.
You've been listening to Resilience Radio. I'm Irvin Eisenberg. If you like this episode, stay tuned. There'll be more coming. You can subscribe. Sharing it with a friend is really one of the best things you can do. Probably if you enjoy it, probably for you and your friend, but also really helps out the podcast and me just be able to spread the word. The music was brought to you by Aaron Marcus with their tune Some Biological Process. And until next time, take care.